Welcome to Inside Scoop Live, the podcast where indie authors get personal, sharing insights about their books, their writing journeys, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt, and I invite you to join me for engaging conversations with both debut indie authors and seasoned veterans. Whether you're looking for your next great read or a bit of inspiration, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Jalyn Renae Fiske is here today to talk about her short story collection, Side Quest Stories. It's a captivating mix of fantasy, horror, and science fiction pulled from nearly a decade of published work. With stories originally scattered across magazines, anthologies, and websites, Jalyn has brought them together in one immersive volume that explores adventure, tragedy, and mystery through a speculative lens. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Jalyn Renae Fiske is an author, editor, educator, and librarian. She earned her MFA in creative writing from Goddard College in 2017. That same year, she began her tenure as fiction editor for James Gunn's Astra magazine, and also served as editor-in-chief for the Pitkin Review and editor for Clockhouse. Jalyn writes blends of science fiction, fantasy, and horror that are at times unsettling, strange, or whimsical. She likes to explore themes of identity and transformation, as well as social constructs and systems in her world building that encourages the reader to ask, why is it that way? Could it be different? Should it be? Jalyn's short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in the science fiction tarot anthology, Allegory, Wild Blood, Mythaxis, Fabled Planet, and Sword and Sorceries Volume 7, among others. Her debut short story collection, Side Quest Stories, was released in November 2024. Learn more about Jalyn Renae Fiske and her work at jrenaewriter.com. Well, hi, Jalyn. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your book. What inspired Side Quest Stories, and how would you describe the collection to someone new to your work?
So I've been writing short stories and selling them to publications for about 10 years. And this collection represents, the stories that I've written for the past 10 years. And so a lot of these stories are previously published, and you would have to probably pay like $150 to be able to purchase all of the different magazines and subscriptions that you would need to read all my work. So this is a way for it to be all in one place. And I can, showcase it and really share it and reach many more readers than I was able to before. And it's a collection of science fiction, dark fantasy, tinges of horror are in there, and blends of all three. And I write with a sense of like social critique in my world building. I like to kind of put up a mirror or look at what we have in our lives right now. Yeah. And kind of put a new twist on it. So I would say a lot of my stories deal very heavily with world building aspects.
Oh, okay. Okay, nice. I love that you've put them all together in a collection. I don't know if it's always been really popular, but it feels like we're seeing more and more just outstanding short story collections. And I love that. They're perfect for people who don't have a lot of time or desire to get into full-length novels. So I love it. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
What do you enjoy about writing in the different genres? And do you have a favorite?
Yeah, well, I like exploration, and I like trying out different styles and different subjects and characters and things like that. So certain ideas that I have or certain topics lend itself better to horror, science fiction, or fantasy. Mm-hmm. But I would say that overall, dark fantasy appeals to me quite a bit in horror. I do write science fiction, and I am a fiction editor for a science fiction magazine. So I do love science fiction. Yeah. But when it comes to like story ideas, that's not generally what comes to me the most. Yeah. It would be, dark fantasy.
Yeah, walking on the dark side.
Yeah.
Now, many of your characters seem to be kind of in flux, either, shedding identity, starting over, or, facing kind of uncomfortable changes. Why do you think that kind of transformation makes for such powerful storytelling?
That's a good question. I think we all go through that. So that's what makes the stories relatable and the characters relatable, even if it's in a fantastical setting or time period. We all go through periods of our life and go through shifts and go through changes. That happens naturally. I also think that a lot of us wish that we could change more throughout our lives. and we maybe don't know how or don't feel supported, or it's scary to radically or even a small amount change our lives. And so, that kind of taps into the fear element as well. We don't know what life is like if we chose different things. We don't know who we would encounter, right? Or different experiences we would have if our life was different. Even though we might long for it, we're also kind of scared of it. And so just that idea of transformation, either it being forced on you through circumstance or other characters, or you choosing to go down a path of transformation. I think all of that is very relatable and inspiring, perhaps, for people,
Yeah.
or at least something to kind of relate back to their own lives.
Yeah, yeah. Inspiring and, as you said, kind of scary. We just fear the unknown. That's human nature.
Yeah.
And yeah. Now, in several of your stories, characters are forced to confront things that they'd rather not see, either about themselves or the world around them. What
hmm
interests you in writing that kind of, I don't know, sort of emotional reckoning?
hmm I mean, I'm sure a lot of it comes from my own personal experience. I actively seek out change. And maybe that makes me a restless person or someone who's just not satisfied all the time. But I call it course correction. So I will periodically course correct my life if I like, oh, this is not what I want to be doing. Or, oh, this is not the direction I want to be going. And so I do engage in that in myself. And it has made a world of difference for me,
Yeah.
and it has improved my circumstances in my life. So I think a part of me wants to encourage that for others. And so stories are a way to see others kind of engage in that and see how it ends up for them. So I think that it's a good way to look at that.
Yeah, I'm impressed. Wow, you actually seek out change where others are running and hiding. I'm talking about myself here.
Yes. And also, I'm a teacher. And so that is something that I try to instill in my students in the classroom. And I'm an English teacher. So the things that we learn about in literature, a lot of characters are dealing with change. That's a very, very common thing that happens in stories, and kids are in a very volatile stage. I taught middle school for the most part. And that's like all about change. And so I think that being able to look at it in a less scary light, I think is helpful for most
Yeah,
people.
yeah. My son is an AP in middle school, so
hmm
whew, tough
Yeah.
age. Talk about the power element. Some of your characters are willing to sacrifice parts of themselves to either, gain power or status. And, that seems to be really relatable in the world today. What interests you in kind of exploring the personal cost of these choices?
Yeah. Well, we all live within a bigger system, and we can't really change that system very much in our personal lives, but we can change ourselves and we can change how we face the challenges in our lives. And a lot of that does relate to power. So the powerful control the narrative, right? The powerful control society. And I think a lot of us can feel very helpless. So my characters, if the story involves that type of dynamic, my characters often have to learn to stand up or start, the
Mhm.
change of something. Or again, it's just within themselves. They decide to no longer engage in this. They do decide to sacrifice something in exchange for power, but there's a cost to that. And so I like to explore all those aspects because I think that's a question we should always be asking ourselves throughout our lives. Not that we need to like sacrifice like things all the time, but in relationship to how we exist in our society, in our relationship with how we exist to others, is that the power dynamic we want? And
Yeah.
so, what can we do in our lives and what we can do in our sphere? What are we willing to give up in order to bring more balance to that power?
Okay. I had visions of giving up your firstborn, Yeah.
Well, and so in classic fairy tales, you give up your firstborn in order to get riches.
Yeah.
That's very common, right? And so one of the stories, Soul Candy, is a dystopian story. And the character basically gives up his mediocre life where he has everything. Everything's fine. It's just mediocre
Mm.
in his eyes, at least. And he gives it all up in order to rise up the social ladder to the elite. It's kind of, like selling your soul to the devil. Like he didn't realize the cost was going to be as steep as it was.
Right, right. Earlier, you talked a little bit about, a lot of what you write being based on yourself or your kind of
Mhm.
experiences. And I mean, speculative fiction can be a mirror. What reflections of real life do you hope your readers might see in your stories?
Yeah. Well, there's one story, Zipper Boy and the Girl Made of Light, and that is not a story anywhere like in the realm of reality. But it deals with, adolescent children kind of navigating independence and kind of coming into their own and having more agency in their life instead of relying on adults to save them.
Mm.
And that's a common theme in that grade level of literature. So it's relatable. Like that is something that we all go through and experience. I just put it in a fantastical realm so that you can just see characters navigating, the same thing I'm going through, but in a more fantastical way. So it feels a little bit more escapism,
Hmm.
but you're still getting those real world lessons.
Yeah, nice, nice. And your title, oh my gosh. All of your titles, actually, they're so vivid and unusual. And it sounds like you have a lot of fun with that. And
Yeah,
how much
yeah.
do they hint at kind of what's coming? How much are they meant to be a surprise? And
Mhm.
how do you come up with them?
Yeah, that is a really great question. Sometimes I come up with the title first. I have a story concept and then the title comes to me. And the title often touches on the theme of the story for me,
Mhm.
or at least the central imagery or the central component that kind of guides the rest of the narrative. So for me as a writer, it acts as a guidepost sometimes as I'm writing. But other times I create the title after the story is complete. Again, I look at like, what is this story really about? And so that's why some of my the titles, excuse me, can sound maybe not abstract, but strange.
Mhm.
And that's just because you haven't read the story yet, right? So I do try to go more thematic with the titles if possible, but also anchor it in something tangible, like A Grave of Wind and Leaves. That is something you can see. Zipper
Mhm.
Boy and the Girl Made of Light, you can tell those are two characters, those are two people. But then there's a little more abstract ones like Dark the Sky, Radiant the Road, that you get a sense that's more like the mood or the emotion of the story. And you get a sense that there's some sort of mystical element going on. But then other times I just love alliteration. So verities, fairies is, kind of a rhyming, kind of that lyrical, playful part, which is ironic because the story is really dark and a little twisted. But I think that adds the playfulness to it. It is supposed to be whimsical, but darkly whimsical.
Okay.
So I do try to think about how does the story feel? What is its theme? And I go from there. But yeah, I like to have fun with it. I want to have different types of titles.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like fun, and that's kind of what drew me to it because I've talked to many authors that the title is their least favorite part, or
Oh,
can
I
be
love it.
daunting. But yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
love the title. Yeah.
Now, your stories often build tension through mystery and limited perspective.
Mhm.
How do you decide what to reveal, when to hold back, and how to keep readers engaged without losing them?
Yeah, that is honestly pretty intuitive after so many years of writing.
Mm,
But I do generally follow the rule that every scene, every interaction builds on the plot as well as characterization, as well as tension. So you try to do all three as you go along. And the only way to sustain suspense or mystery is to not reveal it all. So you
yeah,
have to hold back, but you have to give the reader just enough that they are following along, like little breadcrumbs, and they
yeah,
want to find out more. And I do think that comes from practice. It's really hard to just give a clear, direct answer, like how to do that. But if you yourself in your heart know your story and you know where it's going, and you put yourself in the mind of your characters, what would bring suspense to the characters? What would they find mysterious? What would make the characters want to look further and deeper into this? And then the readers do too.
yeah. Well, like you said, it's just kind of a skill set. I mean, it doesn't just happen.
Yeah, it is. It's practice and it's being told, no, you're doing that wrong, or, oh, you're doing this right. I've been involved in many, many writing groups, critique circles, workshops. Lots of people have read drafts of my stories along the way, lots of authors, like fellow writers. and they give me feedback. So it's through a lot of that back and forth, writing drafts, getting feedback, and incorporating that feedback that you kind of start learning how to do those types of things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, writing it, the actual writing process itself is lonely. So, I mean, getting out there and
Mhm.
getting feedback from other authors and, groups like that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I always advocate for that.
Yeah, yeah. You talked a little bit about power and social commentary. In your story, This Our River, These Are Gods, deals with injustice and systemic power. What role does social commentary actually play in your work?
So I have my bachelor's in political science.
Mm,
And so that aspect of just politics, how society functions, the chosen government, and how people, interact in their own respective societies is very interesting to me. And so there's always elements of social commentary. I mean, within any society, you can comment on it, and no
yes.
society is perfect. And I think that is interesting to people to think about how we interact with each other. Could it be different? Can it be improved? Is there a different way than what we know? And especially when you travel abroad or meet people from different cultures, sometimes that's very fascinating how they live differently or how
Yeah.
they view things differently. So my stories, basically, I create my own cultures, I create my own societies. I have a lot of fun with that. But every society like lives in relationship to other societies. So
Mm,
none are built in isolation, right? So you can find and relate to all of the worlds that I build because all societies are, they have a lot of similarities. And I always think we can do better. I think that we can do better, but it requires that we, look at what we have and say, yeah, it could be a little better. And how can we do that? And I don't think that we need to do that all the time, actively, intentionally. But I would hope that if someone reads my stories, they can pause and say, huh, that sounds a little like this. Maybe it could be different. And I think that's kind of what I would like everyone to be able to do, is just kind
yeah.
of reflect a little on that.
Yeah, yeah. How does tone shape the emotional core of each story? Because your settings kind of range from
Mhm.
eerie to tragic to playful and light. And
I think generally I decide the tone after I decide on what the story is about. Sometimes as I'm writing the story, the tone comes out. Sometimes I write and I'm not really planning at all anything. I figure it out as I go. But the tone does start with the setting. So you kind of immediately know from the beginning how it's going to go, or if you need to like change it, because certain stories require, I think, or are suited best for certain tones.
mm,
So, like a creepy story needs like a more horrific story, if that's the events of the story are kind of horrifying, then there probably should be a creepier tone and mood set in the beginning. And that's done with like the words you choose, as well as the setting that you choose. And sometimes even the sentence structure can create that feeling of something ominous is about to happen. And then if you want something uplifting and happy, that also changes how you write, in my opinion. Like you can change your sentence structure and your word choice and everything to create a more playful reading and a more playful story. And usually I use that type of tone for stories involving younger characters
mm.
that are, embarking on some self-discovery, not tragic stuff, but overcoming things. I think that is better suited for more uplifting tones.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me, what we can do with words. Like you
Yeah,
can read a
yeah.
passage and you can be just shrouded in darkness or, just feel light as a feather. It just amazes me. I don't, I
It
feel like
is.
it
It's very
shouldn't at this
cool.
point, but it does. It always, yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool. You can do so much with words.
For sure. Now, you open the book with a poem. What guided the structure and flow of the collection
Mhm.
overall? It's very wow.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. It took me a long time. I struggled for months, actually. I self-published this collection, right? So I knew it was coming. Like I didn't do this too quickly. And I spent definitely several months during the process of putting the book together, thinking about the order. And I came up with probably 9 different possible orders to put the book
Mm,
in. And I
wow.
finally settled on the one that we ended up with. But I decided to open up with a poem. I did decide that early on because I think it's maybe odd to have a poem in the middle of a book. So I thought maybe I could have it at the beginning or at the end. I really did want to include Entwined, the poem, in here because it's a really concentrated distillation of what I think the overall tone and message of the book is overall. And I decided that to open up with it, like, hey, not everyone likes poetry, so let's just go ahead and do that. And it's also a poem where there's a little bit of an opening at the end where like you're not quite sure necessarily where it leads. And so I thought that would suit well opening the book that way.
Yeah. I do like books that open with a poem. It's kind of like a prologue, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a story of yours that you think will catch readers off guard?
One story that I think is the most shocking, but also the one that most people love the most, which I always find fascinating because it's a disturbing story. It's Verity's Fairy Teas, and it's about fairies and it's about teas. That's usually what I say. And they're like, oh, that sounds great. And they read it and they're like, oh my gosh. So it definitely takes like an unsettling, disturbing turn that people are not expecting. But by the end, they either love it or they hate it. Most people, the vast majority of people love it. And from reviews that I get from readers, that is the one story that they often mention as being their favorite.
Yeah.
I guess they like the shock. Yeah, they like the shock of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Keep us on our toes, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The emotional tone of the book shifts from, dark to humorous to heartbreaking. Did you map out those tonal shifts to keep readers grounded as the collection moves from one emotional register to another?
Yes. I'm a very structured person. I try to be looser, but I am very structured. And so my first inclination was, oh, I'll section off the book into genres, or I'll section off the book into tones. Like here's the dark section, here's the lighthearted section. And, I sat with that for a little bit and I was like, no, that's not how life is. Life is up and down.
Oh.
It's all over the place. That's not really like, we don't experience life in compartments like that. So I did decide to, just mix it all in. And I wanted it to go up and down. The first poem, Entwined, is about life. It's about the journey of life and stumbling. So I didn't want the collection to end on a downer, like to steadily head down to depression. And I didn't want the collection to steadily increase to hope either, because again, that's not how life goes. And so I did decide to kind of create an up and down. So whenever there is a particularly dark or sad story, I tried to follow it with a more uplifting story, kind of like a roller coaster, I guess, in that it kind of spikes up in terms of like lightheartedness factor. Yeah. It goes up so that we can gradually kind of come back down again and then go up.
Yeah, it's like a novel. You have so much tension, then you have to take a break. You have to give the readers a break.
Exactly.
You have to give the characters a break. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Also, I feel like if you kind of section it out, okay, these are the dark fantasy stories, these are the lighthearted, feel-good moments. I don't know if people would tend to just pick the stories that they want from a certain section,
Yes, I think that some people would be like, oh, I just like horror, so I'm just going to read this section, and they wouldn't read the others.
Yeah. I mean,
the other thing, is that a lot of my stories kind of blend genres or tones even. Mm-hmm. So some of the stories, it was very difficult to even think about which category they might fall under. So I'm glad I abandoned that idea and went with what I did. I think, it's a really good flow to it.
Yeah. Did you have a certain kind of reader, type of reader in mind while you were writing your stories?
I have always wanted to bring more people over to the fantasy side. Ever since I was a kid, a very small child, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I loved fantasy most of all. And back then, because I'm 40, so this was a while ago. Back then, like fantasy wasn't a big thing like it is now. Mm-hmm. So it felt kind of lonely being a fantasy reader back then. So that was always kind of a goal of mine, to bring more people into fantasy. So I think that my target audience is adults. My target audience is probably, people who like that genre. But now I think it's really people who maybe haven't read too much of the genre and maybe have the wrong idea about the genre, or a small idea of what the genre can be. So it hopefully is approachable enough for people who haven't read a lot of fantasy before, or science fiction and horror.
Yeah.
and is relatable enough that, again, that like anyone can really pick it up and read it. So that, romantasy is very big right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think readers who are looking for romantasy specifically, there might be disappointed with my book because it's not spicy. It's not that type of
Yeah, that's a tough
stories.
crowd. Yeah.
Yes. So I feel like for them, like, again, like the word fantasy has changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
So if you say fantasy now, that is what a lot of people are going to think about. And that's not what I'm writing. So I think maybe my target audience is folks who aren't too deep into the fantasy genre as it is now, that they would find the stories really compelling and interesting.
Yeah. And it's a good book to explore the different genres.
Yeah, it's like a good introduction to different genres, even different story structures. I use so many different structures, nonlinear, flashbacks. I use artifacts or like hybrid style in some of them. So
Nice.
there's
Nice.
a good sampling of everything in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we wrap up, can you tell us what you're working on now? Do you have any new short stories, or are you going to look at novels or returning worlds that you visited in the past?
Yeah. I always have multiple projects going at the same time. That's because it takes me a while to write. I work full time and I write when I can. So I have about 3 short stories that are about half done that I'm revising or finishing. And I'm revising a novel, a post-apocalyptic dystopian novel.
Oh,
Hopefully I'm wrapping that up in the next month, like the next 4 weeks. I really just need to push through it and finish it. It's like on its 3rd or 4th revision at this point. So it needs to be done. And yes, I do want to turn some of the short stories that are in side quest stories. I want to turn them into novels. I've always wanted to. So Soul Candy is on the docket, and Verities Fairyties as well, and Dark the Sky, Radiant the Road. Those are probably the 3 that I am planning to expand into novels.
oh, nice, nice. See, short stories are so great, aren't they?
They are. I love short stories.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you have a lot going on and more than enough to keep you busy for a while, for sure. Did you have anything else you wanted to add today?
Well, I just really appreciate this opportunity to talk about my work. Indie authors don't always have a good opportunity to be able to talk about what they're up to. And so this is such a wonderful opportunity. I'm really appreciative, and this is very fun and exciting. And I'm really, really glad that I was able to talk about the things that I love the most, which is writing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a little bit about yourself and your work. I really, really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Jalyn Renae Fiske, author of Side Quest Stories. Learn more about Jalyn Renae Fiske at jrenaewriter.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.